let's get into it. We got an episode to record here. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds about right. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, we're recording this the afternoon of Wednesday, November 6th, the day after the Tuesday where Donald Trump won re-election to become just the second president to get re-elected to non-consecutive terms. I think those of you who listen to this podcast like these little tidbits of history, and you know that fact about Grover Cleveland. Donald Trump now joins that list. Look, we're going to talk about this in a little bit of historical context and how we can start to place this moment in history. But obviously, we have to live in the present moment as well, with Trump winning and Harris losing. So let's call this our final 2024 election special episode. We've been enjoying doing these, diving into this current election. We're doing a video version as well. Thanks to all of you who are joining us and watching this on YouTube. But here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody. Hey.
Yeah. You know what I mean? You can't even muster the there that you usually add to the hey there. Yes. I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. So look, rough day. I think our listeners will understand for all of us. You know, we are sort of disappointed and scared and a little kind of enraged by this moment. But I will say I feel a lot like I did in 2016, which is kind of heartbroken that so many people didn't find Trump's behavior disqualifying. And I understand that people make political decisions for all sorts of reasons, but you know, you draw a line somewhere, and I really thought the line was a little clearer with this guy. I don't know if there's a way to sugarcoat it, but I want to get your thoughts. I mean, if I can just start and tell you kind of this morning, I called my parents. They were the first people I reached out to. And I kind of found myself saying, I'm going to try and not choke up when I say this, but, I kind of found myself saying to them, like, I'm really sorry, about how all this has gone down, because, there are people who have devoted their lives to trying to nudge this country a little closer to their values, which are my values. And there have been setbacks over the years, but this one just feels big. And, I'll be honest, they're getting up in age. I don't know how many more national elections they're going to see. And so it just kind of breaks my heart to watch our country move in this direction. And so that's kind of my emotional tenor for the morning. I have lots of other thoughts about the state of the nature of the race and where we go from here. But I don't know, Nikki, I feel like I saw a post from you this morning where you were kind of also thinking about generations and generational change and that kind of longer sweep as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I have been, the drum I've been pounding since 2016 is that we can't just assert that everyone agrees on inclusive multiracial democracy, and that's what this is a battle over. Because people haven't done a great job of making the argument that that's the kind of society we should live in. They've just kind of asserted it. And you don't win that argument by just asserting it. You've got to make the case. And making that case is a hard one to make. I mean, I don't find the values hard to defend, but I think that persuading people that a more inclusive, rights and rules-bound society is in their best interest can be a hard case to make when they see their material interests and their social interests as not really related to that kind of democracy. And so I think that winning that argument or persuading people to that view is something that does take a generation, if not generations. And the reason that I want to emphasize that is because the difference for me between 2016 and 2024 is that I was in Charlottesville in 2016, and the day after the election, people were shocked, they were stunned, and they were moved to solidarity. The Women's March was being organized. People were trying to figure out, like, how do I keep my neighbors safe? How do I mobilize the resources that I have in order to defend and protect people and defend and protect my vision of the future? And what I have heard from friends in the last 12 hours or so is that they're tired and resigned. Yeah. There isn't a mass mobilization happening among the people who mobilized last time. And that's not okay. Like, I'm tired too. And I'm not saying that you need to like go march in the streets today. But the work continues.
Yeah. I mean, this was rough. Like I'm having flashbacks, I think, of 2016 too, because I was not at Wellesley at 2016. I was still at Hunter College, but I know the feeling, because I started the year after, of just how students told me about how they were all gathered in Alumni Hall and waiting to sort of like hear the news about, their famous alumna, Hillary Clinton, being president. And as I'm watching the footage and I'm looking at Howard University and I'm seeing like, the dais and Founders Hall behind it and students who are like waiting to see a bison at the top of the ticket, and that feeling that it's not gonna come, that it's not gonna happen. And as a professor, like I feel in a unique position because you're close to these students, you're interacting with these students, you're trying to, literally give them as much information as you possibly can to empower them to go out in the world. And it's devastating. It's really devastating. This is also the first election that like my son has paid attention to. He's 10. And, he wanted to stay up and I was like, you got to go to bed, buddy. And he woke me up at almost 5:36 this morning and was like, what happened? Did she win? And I was like, no, she didn't. And he first he was shocked and then he burst into tears. And he was like, because he watches way too much stuff he probably shouldn't watch, and hears us talking. He was like, well, what's going to happen with Project 2025? And what's going to happen with this? And what about that? And I'm like, you are 10. You shouldn't be knowing all of this. But I had to encourage him and I had to just say, that things are going to be okay. And I, my husband called, he's in Dubai, and we all talked to him and we were like, what's the title of mommy's book? And he was like, We Refuse. I was like, that's right. I was like, that's right. We keep on fighting. We keep on fighting. We don't stop. And so it was good. But even now, if I talk too much, I'm going to cry. It's so
right. I would say, Kelly, your book was actually one of the first that I thought of because it is also easy as you're kind of like trying to figure out what the next step is to just feel despair and exhaustion and I can't do this for another 4 years, 8 years, generation. And I think what's so useful about your work in this moment is that you remind us that there are a lot of different ways in which we enact both resistance and visions of the future.
And that we've been doing this for a long time. This is not new work. This is not work that we haven't, I think about and in this way, this podcast is really instrumental because I'm thinking about I always go back in the time machine. I'm like, how did people feel when Andrew Johnson was elected? How did people feel when Andrew Jackson was elected? How did Black people feel betrayed when Woodrow Wilson was elected and he completely reneged on all the promises they thought would happen for them? Trump is not the first president and he will not be the last to disappoint women and people of color and other marginalized groups. But I think it's also okay to, to be human, to take a beat, to grieve, to be upset. And then when you're ready, get back into the fight.
Well, I mean, I'm so glad, you guys are bringing this up. I think it's useful for me. It's helpful for our listeners. But gosh, I mean, this idea that history is really moved by people who were tired and still decided to kind of do the work. I mean, that could be the subtitle to this podcast. I feel like that's when we encounter people. It's one of the things I really try and do in this show is really put myself in the sort of day to day, as you were just saying, Kelly, of what did it feel like in that moment? And more often than not, you could be like, this person was probably just really tired and they still, put on their boots and went to work for what they believed in. And that, again, and then at the same time, to reiterate, that can manifest itself in all sorts of different ways. And so I think this next stretch will be a particularly kind of nuanced way for people to find their agency. And I'm a big believer. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. We've talked about this on the show, but I'm a big believer that there are lots of ways to exert your politics, lots of ways to live your values. It's not just about who you vote for every 2 or 4 years. And, I think especially now, if you want to get that sort of flywheel of agency going again, you have to think just local, small, I'm going to a PTA meeting tonight. I can political acts,
it is a political act.
Your threads post Jody, I was it just encouraged me because it's we sometimes, and it's not misplaced, but sometimes we put too much emphasis on elections and presidential power. and not enough on like, yo, we, the people, we do this. Like
Yeah.
that we do have agency and we do have the ability to shift things, and that it really does start at a local level. And so that to me is just a reminder that like change doesn't always have to look huge and massive. It can also look slow and incremental, but that's not progress, you know?
Right. Yeah.
One of the watchwords that I've had for the past few years has been this word community. And it's something that I really tried to think about because change operates on a lot of different levels. And especially with the Supreme Court the way it is, and now the executive and legislative branches the way they are, there aren't a lot of levers of power to pull right now if you're hoping for a more progressive and inclusive and fair and equitable, justice-driven country. And so when you think about what levers you can pull, it starts with the community around you. And I actually think it's a problem when you're an institution or a person who is trying to affect national change that's not taking care of your local community, that's ignoring or even harming your local community. This is something I think about all the time with universities.
Yes.
If you want to be this big change agent, you want to be this big force for progressive politics, or even just for maybe not even progressive politics, but rule of law or democracy or whatever, and you're a shitty neighbor.
Yeah.
And if you're bad in your community, you don't have the moral authority to be good in your country. And I think that might be something that can help people reframe about the institutions that they already operate in and how they can make those fairer and more just.
Funny enough, I feel like this is a place where like young people tend to just get it intuitively that like your politics in your small circle mirror and relate to your politics in the big circle, and like that's why kind of these little interscene university fights.
Yeah.
Sometimes you look at them and you're like, oh, that's just a little squabble, but then like I think, you know, to give college kids credit, like they understand the connection between the little fight in the community and the big fight that's going on in the world. And I think like people tend to lose that over time as they get wrapped up in the sort of nationalization of their politics. Okay. You mentioned the Supreme Court. You mentioned the sort of balance of power. You mentioned the kind of way that I think these next 4 years will reshape American politics. This election sort of signals a reshaping of American politics. I'm curious if the two of you have thoughts, from a historical perspective about this moment. Is this closing? And I have a thought here, but is this the closing of an era? Is this the opening of an era? A lot of people are talking just demographically about a realignment, and the Republicans in this last night putting together a kind of more diverse coalition than they ever put together. A lot of people are talking about the Democratic Party kind of like fully showing that they've abandoned a lot of their sort of bit core principles. But like, if you can take a step back in this moment, how do you see this?
I mean, I don't see it as something new, but I almost see it as a continuation of the status quo. Like for a lot of my I'm on like 50 Goop chats, but like for a lot of my Black women friends, we're like, it's another Wednesday. You know what I mean? And what I mean in terms of like how we think of patriarchy, how we think of racism, how we think of like, like the suppression and oppression of people. Like it feels like things will continue to be just as racist and as sexist and as problematic as they have always been. And they might manifest themselves a little bit more robustly, legislatively, but the way that people feel, I don't think has changed. I think people were voting in very white supremacist interests and very sexist interests. And that's been pretty consistent, like I think that's been a through line in American history is how much people have allegiance to these beliefs about women and people of color.
Well, wait, can I sort of press you a little bit on that?
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of people are trying to go through these feelings. And I think history really helps here. But like this idea of, was a vote last night an endorsement of the misogyny and racism that we see, or was it a willingness to put that aside in subservience to economic interests or a sense of betrayal.
It's both to me.
And,
I mean, like,
and
if you
whether
can
that's a
put it
distinction
aside,
matters,
if you, I don't even know that you can parcel those two out, because if you're willing to sort of go along for the sake of a dollar or the economy or whatever, like it's still the same thing to me. It's still a way of saying that you are not invested in these other ideas. And too many people, I mean, you look at the exit polls, it's like 97% of Black women voted for Kamala, 97%. So I'm like, look, I did my job. You know what I mean? But like, you look at all the other demographics and those numbers are way lower, which says to me that the commitment is just not there.
Yeah.
I think it's also both and, but I would put it maybe a little differently, which is to say there is this fight and recriminations along these lines are going to happen in the left liberal space for months and years to come. It's been going on ever since 2016, which is it race and sexism or is it class and economic interests? And it is both, but we don't always necessarily talk about the ways in which they're related. And I think about these two posts that Elon Musk was circulating before the election, or said that they were interesting, or however it is that he endorses an idea. And one was a chart that showed that women had just passed the point where they were obtaining higher amounts of college education than men were. And the other purported to show that the areas of the country in which women were making more money than men. It actually showed women making 70 to 80% of what men made, 80 to 90, 90 to 100, and then the few counties when they're making more than what men make. These were both posed as major social and economic and political problems.
Right.
That for the first time in history, there were parts of the country in which a woman on average made more than a man on average was presented as a crisis. And the reason that I say that is because there are a lot of people invested in an image of economic success or a belief that their economic success is contingent on a system in which there are certain people who aren't given opportunities. And that cuts along lines of race and gender, but it also cuts along lines of immigration status. And I know we'll talk much more in the months and years to come about Latino men and their vote in this election. But it is the case that Latinos, including very recent immigrants, hold many of them strongly nativist and anti-immigrant views because their understanding of the economy is if more immigrants are allowed into this country, I will lose the economic opportunities that I have. So all of these things are bound up in one another. And when we pit them against one another, we're getting the core questions wrong, I think.
Yeah.
From a historical perspective, I mean, I think we can see, we've talked about it on this show. I think it's one of the sort of joys of history. It gives you this understanding. But, we've seen these moments in American history where there's been the slow, hard work of kind of shoring up our democracy as one that is inclusive for everyone. It's never fully reached it, but there's been these periods where the actual work has been done, Reconstruction, Civil Rights era, and then inevitably followed by a real backlash. And I think we're seeing that dynamic play out a little bit. I mean, for sure, we're seeing that play out now, which brings up this question about how we view whatever era is just coming to a close right now. And I want to bring up something that I saw Nate Cohn write in the Times, actually before the election, where he was kind of writing a why Trump may win kind of scenario. He did one for Kamala as well, but he was writing kind of like theory of the case for why Trump is positioned to win. And he kind of just in plain facts just laid out that like a Trump victory would be seen as closing the bracket on an era of ascendant liberalism in the United States. And if you kind of start with Obama and you get 2 terms of Obama and then, one weird blip of Trump winning, kind of falling ass backwards into winning, but then Biden, and if you take that kind of 15, 20-year period and you say, okay, well, liberals were able to get gay marriage, the Affordable Care Act, the big Biden IRA Act, like, his case was, a Trump victory would kind of close the door on that era of ascendant liberalism. And I remember, and I read that and I was like, wait a minute. We were just in an ascendant liberal era. Like that was the window. Like it certainly didn't look like the window to me. But But I'm so provoked by that idea.
Yeah.
I don't find it comforting, but I do feel like, gosh, if we do think of history as like progress backlash, the backlash was happening. Did we just get our window of progress?
I mean, I take it back to Reconstruction. Like, if you think about how short Reconstruction was, call it 10 years, 12 years, maybe. It's not a lot of time. It's a couple of presidencies, it's Ulysses S. Grant, it's like, but it is not wholesale, like, change that will hit everyone in the ways that it matters.
Yeah.
And when it does get a little bit of traction, all of that gets snatched away. It gets taken away. And so, there was never land redistribution. There was never sort of an economic revolution. And even the political revolution, one, doesn't extend to women, and two, only extends to Black men for a short period of time before even that is rolled back. So I think the next question is, for me, if I'm thinking of history along sort of like a timeline of errors and beginnings and epics, like what are we going into next? What does that look like? Are we going into what Rayford Logan called the nadir, the worst period of race relations in American history? That's terrifying to me. That's terrifying. I don't want to have to wait another 100 years for progress to be felt in a meaningful way.
I would echo all of that and add to it both a recommendation for reading. So Nathan Connolly, a really crazy smart historian, in 2018 had a piece in the Boston Review called "The Second Nadir," which suggested a particular framework for this period. And also, I would say that if we think about let's call it the Obama-Biden era as liberal ascendancy, we have to think of that as couched in this much broader period of conservative retrenchment, and also think about the ways that really narrowed not only the timeline, but actually the sort of level of change that actually happened. Because if you look at Reconstruction or you look at the Progressive Era, you're talking about periods in which not only was there major legislation passed, but there were constitutional amendments. The very structure of the U.S. government was revised in those periods, and that did not happen here. And in fact, there also wasn't a vision in either the Obama or the Biden era of a genuinely transformative economic model. Like, they were very stuck into a kind of neoliberal economics. But also in the Obama era in particular, in a kind of incrementalism when it comes to change in government, and a real resistance to that kind of institutional and structural change that we will pay the price for at least a generation.
Yeah.
I mean, I find myself persuaded by that what's that sort of cliche? It's like, you don't know you're in the good days when you're in them. Or it's like Obama folks didn't realize. First, I mean, I think it was in their nature to be incrementalist and moderate.
Yes.
But they also probably, part of me is like, if they had known that they were in the window, how would they have acted? And I think
if they'd known how short the window was.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think Biden, to his credit, to some extent, did realize I'm in a short window and tried to really do some things. Though I also continue to kind of come back to this idea that, like, of the many ways you could sort of see this election having played out, I certainly think the fact that the Harris campaign made a basic decision to adopt a kind of defender of status quo in a moment where, again, this is where the history sort of helps you realize, like, oh, when you come out of an era of progress, there's not just, hey, status quo is pretty solid. There's a backlash pulling you all the other direction. And in order to countermand that, you can't just be out there saying, let's just keep it where we're at. You kind of offer a different competing vision. And I think there was, it's pretty clear that the Harris folks didn't choose that. It got them to a very close result, and so it is what it is. But that is the kind of historical context in which we're living. I think we can start to wrap this up. We're going to get back to some more regular quote unquote episodes. We have our pal from Radiotopia, Nate DeMeo, coming in to do a few episodes. He has a beautiful new book that I think we'll read very differently in the light of what has gone down. But it's stories from history that really kind of feel like they connect to now. And so we're going to have some conversations with Nate. We're going to keep doing other little random moments here and there. I want to offer you a chance to just sort of share any final thoughts. I will sort of reiterate my final thought, which I've been kind of sharing with people and posting on social media. I'm fully off Twitter. Last night, I just decided that's it. I'm gone. But on Threads, but I've been saying, I think, again, like a reminder that there are tons of other ways, and actually I think more impactful, more meaningful ways to enact your values than just by pulling a lever or filling in a bubble. And so I would urge people to try and find those after they lick their wounds or, do what they have to do. Any final thoughts here?
I would just reiterate the idea of solidarity and community, and the idea, and I know that there are folks who are resistant to this, but you've got to grow the coalition. And that means going out, figuring out what people want, and how to bring them into a broader coalition, how to persuade them that the vision of the future that you're promoting is one that makes their lives better. And you just, that's the work that has to be done. And it means, and there has to be a way to do it that does not involve sacrificing the basic core human rights of other people in this country. And if we're going to build a coalition on other people's human rights, that's not a coalition I want to be part of.
No.
So there has to be a different vision for the future. It cannot be a return to the Clinton era, and it can't even really be a return to the Obama era.
Yeah. I second and third all that's being said. I think for me, and I kind of write about this a little bit in my book, it's just like Black women are tired. Black women are tired. We are tired of having to be the lifeguard that runs in to the ocean to save you. It is exhausting. And I wish that there was absolutely more solidarity. I wish that there was absolutely more community. And that's what I'm still working on and working toward. And the only way I can do that is with sort of like the skills and talents I have. So I write, I teach, I mentor, I cultivate this work. And that for me really feeds me. Being in the classroom, writing books, being with you guys, really does feed me. I'm glad that we met and that we recorded and that we had time to sort of do this, because it's important work and it's part of the work.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks to the two of you for doing this, and thanks for being such good partners here as we sort of navigate these choppy waters. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kelly Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Bye, everyone.